Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for a video. We are going to discuss what happens in a mouse's brain when they are seeking new information. What differences in brain activity might there be when they know the outcome versus when they do not know the outcome? The hypothesis for the experiment we are going to talk about today is that there are specific neural pathways that are responsible for a mouse's intrinsic preference for information. But what does that even mean? One question we are going to discuss throughout the video is how do mice value information? We will also explore how scientists have tested this question.
Mice are given two different options, information on the left port or no information on the right port. On the information port, two informative odors can be released. One that would predict a reward will be given, while the other would predict no reward. Information reveals if mice receive water. On the no information port, two nonsense odors can be released, in which both don't relate to whether or not a reward is given. No information doesn't reveal if mice receive water. Both sides have an equal 25% probability of reward. The mice overwhelmingly choose the information port, even with both sides have an equal chance of receiving water. The mice would rather have the knowledge if they are going to receive a water reward instead of not knowing the outcome of the water reward at the no information port.
Let's look at this question again. So far, we have learned that mice do indeed prefer having information over having no information. Next, we will explore what exactly intrinsic and extrinsic value is. Is the preference in the hypothesis stated previously intrinsic or extrinsic? We will discuss exactly what that means and why we need to know it. The next two terms we are going to be going over today are intrinsic and extrinsic value. This will help us to have a deeper understanding of this experiment and the results. We are going to use an example to illustrate the difference. Imagine that you are taking a neuroscience class and your first exam is coming up. Exciting, right? Well, if you are studying and are interested in learning the information, this would be intrinsic value. In contrast, extrinsic value would indicate that you're looking for some type of reward. In this example, studying to receive an A would be an example of extrinsic motivation.
To test the mice's value of information, the question was asked if the mice would sacrifice reward for information. On the left information port, mice would receive 1 to 5 drops of water. On the right, no information port, the mice would receive 4 drops of water consistently. Both sides experience 50% probability of reward. So is their choice extrinsic or intrinsic? If the mice choose the information at a diminished reward, then choosing the no information, the mice's choice is intrinsic because of the subjective value of information and not the extrinsic objective value of the water reward. Although around 50% of mice chose the information port with 1 drop given as reward, it is important that half chose to sacrifice their water reward in order to gain information, showing intrinsic value. The other 50% of mice chose the no information port with a consistent 4 drops of water, showing the extrinsic value of reward. The mice's choice is an integration of intrinsic and extrinsic value. As water reward increases to 2 drops, even more mice chose the information at a significantly decreased water reward than that at the no information port. Obviously, as water reward increases, the mice's preference becomes greater, but the water reward at the information port is half of that at the no information port, and the majority chose information, showing more intrinsic value than extrinsic. As water reward increases to 3, still a drop less than that at the no information port, More mice prefer the information port. As water reward is an equal 4 drops at both ports, almost all mice chose information. Finally, as the water reward at the information port is more than the no information port, all mice chose information. As water reward increased at the information port, the mice's preference changed, which is evident. But the crucial takeaway is the actions while the water reward is less at the information port. The mice were willing to choose information at the sacrifice of the water reward, showing intrinsic value.
Back to our hypothesis, we have proven that mice do have an intrinsic value for information. Now, let's see if there are any specific neural pathways that are responsible for this preference. Now, you may be wondering, how exactly do mice think when they are making decisions? This is the orbitofrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is important in the study we are discussing today. Researchers look at the orbitofrontal cortex when mice are performing tasks to see the neural activity going on here. The orbitofrontal cortex is involved in processing reward-related information, and there are pathways that represent both intrinsic and extrinsic value.
Now that we understand how the study was performed and where in the brain we are looking, let's find out what in the brain is responsible for the results of the study. This is done by looking at the neurons, which are the brain cells responsible for taking in and sending signals, and the neural pathways, which is a connection of neurons. To simplify things, I'm going to use an analogy. In this study, scientists looked at the neural pathways, or roads, and how active neurons are based on the calcium levels, or how many cars are on the road. So, roads equal neural pathways, and cars equal activity or calcium levels. Just like how two roads can intersect but be different street names, two activities can involve the same neurons but still have separate neural pathways. The neuroactivity, or number of cars on the road, were observed when the mouse smelled the ports. They saw more cars or activity when the mouse knew the outcome and less activity or cars when the mouse did not know the outcome. The graph on the right compares the activity after receiving information about the reward, or the blue line, and after not receiving information about the reward, or the red line. We can see that when mice receive information, they have more cars on the road or more activity. This is seen as the blue line is higher on the graph and there are more cars on the blue road. We see different levels of activity. Does this mean that they are separate pathways? Let's look at the differences in neurons that do not overlap or the parts of the road that do not intersect. Their findings suggest that mice have distinct pathways or roads that are used based on if they are given information or no information about the reward. These two pathways represent intrinsic and extrinsic value, respectively. We can see based on the diagram on the left that getting information and giving information are two different pathways because they do not share all of the same neurons. On the right is a visual representation of how this would look if it were a road. Why does this matter? We are able to see different roads used in the brain and see it reflected in the mouse's decision in the study, or we are able to see the pathways and brain cells that are activated after receiving or not receiving information. Their hypothesis is that there is a specific neural pathway responsible for mice's intrinsic preference for information. We have proven that there are neural pathways responsible for mice's intrinsic preference for information. How specific is it really, though? If mice just receive information without asking for it, will it trigger the same neural pathway as when a mouse actively chooses information?
What if the mice didn't choose to receive information? Would the neural response be the same or different as when the mice chose to have information? If it were different, what would that mean? Now, our mice have been given a third option. The mice can avoid choosing information or no information and receive a random odor, either giving them information of one or a nonsense odor that does not provide information. They still have a 25% chance of getting a reward, but getting information is not guaranteed. This option is called forced information or forced no information. When the mice choose this option and receive information, we will call that forced information. But if they receive no information, we will call that forced no information. The other options that were present previously are choice information and choice no information. Does receiving forced information result in a same or different neural pathway than choosing information? The study found that choice information and forced information have different neural pathways. This means that actively choosing to get information has a different neural pathway than information being given to the mouse. Notably, however, there is more overlap here than when we were comparing neural pathways as a result of having information versus not having information. This is significant because it proves that the brain processes choosing information versus being forced information differently. Just receiving information isn't enough to trigger the neural pathway related to the intrinsic value associated with information in mice. The mice have to choose to receive information. Now, hopefully, you should understand what our original hypothesis meant and how it was proven. The mice have a preference for information. That preference for information is intrinsic, meaning that the mice will sacrifice a larger reward for information. There are neural pathways responsible for this preference that are different from pathways responsible for the response when given chosen no information. These neural pathways are specific to mice choosing information rather than being forced to receive information. Now, moving forward, more questions to ask. Does this also apply to other animals like humans? And what does that mean for learning? What does that mean for how classes ought to be taught? If students choose when they will receive information rather than receiving information on a reward basis, will they have more enjoyment? Will their brain be more activated? There's multiple ways to go about this. And here are our references and acknowledgements.